Hey, this is Tyler. Welcome back. I'm glad you're here. Thanks for joining me on this ongoing journey and adventure. In our last episode, we went all the way back to our tribal beginnings. We saw how gossip wasn't just idle chatter, but a profound way to reinforce group norms, how the idea of a common enemy could weld small bands into tight knit communities, and how flood stories, mystery rites, and ancestral worship wove the first threads of what we now call religion. We talked about how those early rituals and myths didn't just explain the world, they bound people together, shaping loyalties that could survive drought, war, and exile in tribes. Today, I want to pick up where we left off and bring those same primal forces into the present. We'll dive into the modern offshoots of our tribal instincts, what it looks like when us versus them thinking gets dressed up as political groups, cultural movements, or academic ideologies. We'll explore how institutions, governments, universities, and major media outlets become today's versions of tribal councils with their own ceremonies, hierarchies, and insiders and outsiders. But there's a catch. The very structures we build for stability can dissolve the trust they depend on when they stray from their founding ideals. So we'll ask, how do today's tribes form around shared beliefs, and what keeps those bonds strong? And crucially, why do our political and cultural institutions sometimes feel like unbreakable ties, and other times drive us apart, sowing suspicion instead of solidarity? By the end of this episode, I hope you'll see our modern institutions not as distant bureaucracies, but as living, breathing tribes, equipped with all the strengths and vulnerabilities we inherited from our ancestors. Think back to a time when you walked into a room painted in your favorite team's colors. Suddenly you felt at home, surrounded by fellow fans who cheered the same plays you did. Now swap out sports for politics. In our modern world, political parties and movements function the same way. They're in-group tribes with shared symbols, slogans, and rituals. Make America great again. Black Lives Matter. For the many, not the few. Stepping into a rally or even scrolling a hashtag can feel like entering a sacred space, where your beliefs are validated by a collective roar. But as with any tribe, membership demands conformity. You learn the unspoken rules, what slogans to chant, which leaders to praise, and which questions are off limits. Crossing those lines can get you labeled as a heretic. You're no longer one of us. That sense of belonging can be intoxicating, but it also sets the stage for us versus them conflict. The moment you step outside the circle. Culture works the same way. Consider our symbols and rituals. Flags waving at a 4th of July parade, anthems blaring before a soccer match, protest marches filling a city square. These aren't just decorations or concerts. They're communal experiences that signal you belong here. We wrap ourselves in flags, sing along, carry homemade signs, and by doing so, we physically and emotionally mark the boundary between us and them. In the digital age, those boundaries sharpen in social media echo chambers. Algorithms watch what you like, share, and comment on, and then serve you up more of the same. Before you know it, your feed becomes a closed amphitheater, echoing your own beliefs back at you. You see friends, news outlets, and influencers who reinforce your views, and you rarely encounter dissenting voices. The result? A sense of moral clarity about your own tribe and a deep suspicion and even hostility towards anyone in the wrong profile picture or the wrong opinion. Finally, this dynamic often boils down to a simple primal cry. We versus they. Whether it's Democrats versus Republicans, coasts versus rural America, or intellectuals versus deplorables. Digital tribes are quick to demonize opponents. We label them as lazy, ignorant, immoral, sometimes even dangerous. Once you see them as fundamentally flawed, you justify treating them as less than fully human. And that, more than anything else, corrodes the possibility of honest dialogue. Not only that, but it's also leading to the demise of America. We can no longer work together or trust each other. We're headed towards civil war. In fact, we're already in civil war, albeit one that's distributed across party lines rather than geographical locations as it was during 1861. Let me reiterate, we are already in the midst of a civil war. We have both sides of our political alliances unwilling to compromise with the other, which leads to violence against the opposing side. Both sides engage in this behavior, whether it's the riots in Portland or the January 6th insurrection. When we demonize the other side, we are sacrificing what little agreement we have left, which is what we have that is worth keeping together if we want to survive as Americans. As we move forward, ask yourself, where have you felt that tribal pull in your own political or cultural life? How does it shape what you see and what you don't see? Recognizing these modern tribal arenas is the first step towards stepping back from the fray and reclaiming genuine curiosity about those who think differently. Just as rivers carve its path through rock, our beliefs carve channels through our minds. And those channels are first excavated in two powerful crucibles: universities and the family hearth. A university campus as a sprawling tribal incubator where each department forms its own clan with shared languages, sacred texts, and boundary markers. In the political science building, debates ring out in Marxist, libertarian, or realist terms. Down the hall in economics, it's all about supply curves and market equilibrium. In gender studies, you learn the grammar of identity and power. Students don't just acquire facts, they absorb the very worldview that comes with each discipline, built upon the teachings of some very pathologized teachers. The questions worth asking, the methods deemed valid, and the truths worth defending have been lost to the ideologies which need to be protected against all costs. Yet, this ideological rigidity hasn't arisen by accident. In recent decades, the academic job market has been stagnant. Far more PhDs emerge each year than there are tenured or tenure track positions available. As historian Peter Turchin and others have shown, societies often suffer from elite overproduction. Too many qualified candidates chasing too few prestigious roles. In universities, that glut means faculty openings are fiercely contested. Rather than measure colleagues on true merit, like publications, teaching excellence, or service, departments find it easier to police conformity. Saying the wrong thing can exclude you from hiring pools or research funding because it's simpler to enforce doctrinal litmus tests than it is to design objective, equitable metrics for every field. The result is an echo chamber where dissenting voices are quietly, or perhaps not so quietly, pushed out. In the struggle to secure scarce positions, loyalty to the prevailing orthodoxy often becomes a safer credential than genuine scholarship. So today, when you walk across a campus quad, remember those quadrangles once symbolized open inquiry and free exchange of ideas. Under pressure from elite overproduction and job scarcity, many departments have retrenched into ideological fortresses, monumental in structure but fragile in spirit. If we want our universities to reclaim their role as birthplace of innovation and honest debate, we must acknowledge and address these systemic pressures and champion merit and intellectual diversity over tribal conformity. But if universities are the breeding grounds for progressive ideologies, the family unit remains the primary hothouse for conservative belief. Around the dinner table, or at least within shouting distance of it, parents pass down values of conservative ideology and personal responsibility, faith traditions, and loyalty of time honored principles. Your first lessons in politics, morality, and how the world works often come from mom and dad, long before you've ever read a single textbook. One young person leaves a political theory class convinced that systems must be overhauled, while another walks home from Sunday service certain that tradition and self reliance are life's anchors. In both arenas, there's a subtle process of ideological formation at work. Required readings and family anecdotes alike shape the lens through which we interpret every news headline, every policy debate, every moral dilemma. It doesn't happen all at once, but day by day, from childhood on, it does instill beliefs. It seeps in, page by page, conversation by conversation, until these frameworks become second nature and they become the basis of our belief systems, as we've talked about before. They become the tribal knowledge upon which our group belongs. Yet every tribe, no matter how noble its mission, risks intellectual groupthink. On campus, safe space policies meant to protect minority voices stifle honest debate, turning classrooms into echo chambers of approved opinions, and it is unsafe to speak any other idea lest you be canceled amongst your peers. I've seen brilliant individuals self censor mid argument, fearing a single misstep will earn them an invitation to the digital gallows. Likewise, on conservative side, in the family, an unspoken rule, this is how we've always done it, can make questioning cherished beliefs feel like betrayal, discouraging the very curiosity that spurs growth. That's where thought leaders, whether tenured professors or revered family elders, carry enormous influence. A charismatic lecturer can turn a dusty theory into the next big movement. A trusted parent or grandparent can instill convictions that last a lifetime. When these figures champion inquiry over dogma, inviting respectful challenge rather than shutting it down, they transform ideological strongholds into forums for genuine exploration. That is wisdom. And we need more conversation, not more cancellation. We need more listening, not more rhetoric. And we need more love and less hatred. So whether your core beliefs were forged under fluorescent lecture light halls or by the soft glow of a kitchen lamp, remember this: the healthiest tribes welcome dissent as proof of strength. The moment we stop wrestling with uncomfortable ideas is the moment we stop growing, both as individuals and as a society. Ask yourself today, what ideas have I never questioned? And give yourself permission to explore different perspectives. True intellectual and family bonds alike depend on the courage to face those questions together. Next, every tribe needs a narrative, but not all narratives are created equal. Let's start by looking back at historical propaganda, where leaders harnessed myth and message to forge unity or rally for war. In the 18th and 19th centuries, nation-building posters proclaimed "United we stand" or "Freedom forever," weaving diverse populations into a single people with a shared purpose. Yet those same tools could and did glorify war, demonize enemies, and obscure inconvenient truths about colonial conquest or wartime atrocities. Propaganda has always carried a double edge. It can knit societies together or bind them in moral catastrophe. Fast forward to today's modern common lies, and we see a similar duality. Some shared illusions actually enable society to function. We all agree that money, paper bills, or digital digits have real value, even though its worth is based purely on our collective belief. Without that lie, markets collapse and trade breaks down. Likewise, the slogan, "We are all Americans," invites vast groups of people from wildly different backgrounds to act in concert for a common good when they're within the nation of America. These myths aren't malicious. They're the social glue that underpins commerce, law, and civic solidarity. But But on the flip side, we face an avalanche of fake news, deep fakes, and conspiracy theories designed to fracture rather than unite. When it's doctored videos of public figures or an algorithm driven echo chamber that push you ever deeper into your own worldview, these lies weaponize fear and suspicion. They turn us versus them into an existential battle, eroding empathy and driving wedges between neighbors who share the same zip code. Why do we fall for both kinds of lies? Well, it comes to the psychology of belief. Our brains are wired for motivated reasoning. We seek out information that confirms what we already want to believe, and we reject anything that threatens our identity or tribe. Confirmation bias ensures that we latch onto a narrative, whether that's the necessity of universal currency or a fringe conspiracy. We filter every new fact through that pre existing lens. This isn't simply ignorance, it's an evolutionary shortcut that helped our ancestors make rapid decisions in high stakes environments. The combined effect of these forces is a deep erosion of trust. When we realize that the institutions we once counted on, mainstream media, academic journals, and even scientific consensus, can be manipulated or misrepresented, faith in the official sources plummets. Polls show that fewer than half of Americans now trust news media. Skepticism towards government and large corporations is equally high. Once trust dissipates, it's hard to rebuild, and societies risk fragmenting into rival tribes who share nothing more than contempt for the other side. In Weimar Germany, the erosion of trust in democratic institutions mirrored today's crisis of faith in our modern tribes. Back then, hyperinflation, political gridlock, and repeated crises left ordinary Germans convinced that the Republic's leaders were either corrupt or clueless. So when Hitler and the Nazis promised decisive action, many saw it as their only hope. In fact, they embraced it. Weimar's legacy elites clung to pre war power structures, even as popular support crumbled, undermining the Republic's legitimacy and paving way for an authoritarian takeover ring. Surprisingly similar to today's America. In the same way, when citizens lose confidence in governments, media outlets, and universities, they become vulnerable to demagogues who exploit that distrust, just as the Nazis did, by offering simple narratives and strongman solutions in place of complex democratic debate. We've lost our trust. It's hard to reacquire, but it's worth reacquiring because the alternate is our dissolution of a nation. By now, you've heard the statistics. Trust in our major institutions, government bodies, corporate boardrooms, or even houses of worship hover at historic lows. Why? Because repeated scandals and cover ups have hollowed out their moral authority. Consider the financial collapse of 2008, when banks deemed too big to fail were propped up by taxpayer dollars despite underwriting risky mortgages. Or recall Enron's executives cooking the books and then walking away with golden parachutes. In the church, revelations of clerical abuse and systematic cover ups have left congregations feeling betrayed by the people closest to them. And in politics, from Watergate to more recent graft and hush money schemes, voters have watched elected leaders behave as if the rules simply don't apply to them. Each of these breaches creates a ripple of cynicism. When people see high-profile actors dodge accountability, they conclude the game is rigged. Pundits lament a post-truth era, but the deeper rot is perceived injustice. Why should I play by the rules if those at the top can just break them with impunity? This cynicism isn't just bad for morale. It undermines social cohesion and fuels polarization, leading to civil war and the fracturing of the nation. Yet despite our best efforts, History shows that no institution or empire can escape the cycle of rise and decline. Just as life moves from birth to growth to decay, nations and their moral authorities follow a similar arc. In times of hardship, strong leaders emerge, whether generals, prophets, or reformers, who rally fractured societies, restore order, and usher in good times. Prosperity and stability breed complacency. And as the years pass, weak leaders step forward, more interested in preserving privileges and their own self interest than pursuing the common good. These weak men preside over growing inequality, bureaucratic sclerosis, and spiritual apostasy until the inevitable hard times arrive in the form of economic crashes, moral collapse, or existential threats. Out of that crucible, new strong figures rise once more, beginning the cycle again. We see this pattern in the great dynasties of Rome and China, in the European monarchies and republics alike. Attempts at permanent reform, open data portals, whistleblower protection, citizen oversight, they just falter when they encounter the very human tendencies towards complacency and self interest. Accepting this rhythm doesn't mean surrendering to cynicism, however. It means understanding that every institutional collapse contains the seeds of renewal. Yet, even within this unyielding cycle of rise, decay, and rebirth, history offers glimmers of hope, meaning that these spirals don't need to be marked by bloodshed. Consider England's Glorious Revolution of 1688, where James II was deposed and William and Mary invited to rule largely by parliamentary consent, ushering in a constitutional monarchy without the mass executions that scarred other dynastic overthrows, like the Bloody Revolution in France. Or look at Japan's restoration in 1868, which transformed a feudal shogun into a modern state through top down reforms rather than a prolonged civil war. In the 20th century, South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission averted wholesale vengeance after apartheid, replacing mass retribution with public testimony and conditional amnesties. And across Europe, in 1989, the Velvet Revolutions ensured entire communist regimes collapsed under waves of peaceful protest, not armed insurgency. What unites these examples is a shared commitment to institutional reform. If you have inclusive dialogue and symbolic ceremonies, then you get the opportunity to have the benefit of all citizens versus just more grifting. And then we can channel the pent up pressure of decline into constructive human transitions. While no political order can escape the inevitability of change, these cases remind us that violence and tragedy are not foreordained. By crafting constitutional checks, nurturing civil society networks, and honoring rituals of closure, societies can weather the darkest hour with far less bloodshed and plant the seeds for a more sustainable rebirth. Meritocracy was supposed to be our beacon, a system where talent, effort, and achievement earn you a place at the top, and it fits within the fairness paradox. In its ideal form, it drives innovation, engineers rewarded for breakthrough designs, teachers promoted for lifting students, and entrepreneurs backed by bold, successful ideas. Yet even meritocracies drift towards oligarchy, as those who climb highest build good old boys networks and informal alliances that lock newcomers out. Suddenly, entry to the same merit ladder requires not just proper performance, also the right connections or pedigree. This drift becomes especially dangerous when we co-locate ourselves with such rich abundance, as shown in experiments called rat utopia. In the experiments with overcrowded rat colonies, abundant resources led to social collapse, rather than continued growth. Hierarchies ossified into tyrannies and then disintegrated into chaos as overstimulation and territoriality strangled the very cooperation that had once flourished in the rat population. Now, this is a really interesting story. It's not just a story because it's played itself out in every experiment that they've done. And that is that the entire population collapses to zero. And it has some modern ties to how we're dealing with society today. If we translate that to our human institutions, our hyperstimulative social media and technology laden society, combined with bureaucratic sclerosis, resembles endless committees, impenetrable regulations, and risk averse cultures where innovation and meritocracy go to die. Well, departments polish their CVs instead of solving real problems. Companies obsess over compliance checklists rather than serving their customers. Nonprofits spin their wheels on internal politics instead of advancing their missions. And underlying all of that is a complacency born of comfort. When an institution experiences long periods of success, such as record profits or high rankings or public acclaim, it loses its appetite for challenge. Staff cling to cozy routines, leaders mistake stability for invulnerability, and dissenting voices are quietly shushed to maintain the calm. Before long, the organization is less a dynamic meritocracy and more a self protecting oligarchy, insulated from the very forces of change that once propelled it forward. The lesson is clear. To keep meritocracy alive, institutions and society must guard against oligarchic drift by regularly opening decision making to fresh talent, streamlining governance to avoid rat utopian overreach, and embracing a healthy dose of constructive discomfort. Otherwise, the very hierarchies built to reward excellence can calcify into the greatest obstacle to it. We see this pattern not just in isolated organizations, but across our entire nation. After decades of economic growth, global ascendancy, and triumphant cultural narratives, we've drifted into a season of weak men. We've crossed the boundary in rat utopia to where we're no longer growing, but we've got too much information, too much wealth, too many elite. And we're looking at the abyss stepping into the hard times across our entire nation, with leaders and citizens alike lulled into complacency by comfort and success. The warnings of our grandparents about hard times ahead now echo louder as global instability, mounting debt, and eroded civic virtue signal that we're teetering on the brink of the next painful chapter. Just as every empire in history has swung from strength of its champions to the vulnerability of their complacent heirs, our country too must reckon with its weakened state before hard times force us to rediscover that which once drove our greatest achievements. As we bring today's exploration to a close, let's pause and stitch together the threads we've uncovered. We saw how modern politics and culture still echo our ancient tribal drives. We traced how universities and media serve as incubators for the core beliefs that guide our choices. We wrestled with common lies and the corrosive power of corruption, watching how propaganda and scandal eat away at the trust that holds societies together. And we examined how competence hierarchies, once engines of progress, can calcify into complacent oligarchies when success breeds stagnation. But this isn't the end of our journey. In our next episode, we'll dive into the deep cycles of civilization itself, from the primal forces of sexual selection and the rise of patriarchy to the stern tests of moral renewal that define each era. We'll explore that timeless refrain: the strong leaders emerge in hard times, build great legacies, then fade, leaving room for new champions to ascend. Before we part, I leave you with this question: how can you engage more critically and more constructively with the institutions that shape your world? What small step could you take today, speaking up, asking harder questions, seeking out overlooked voices to nudge those institutions back towards their best selves? What statements are you keeping hidden that you should release into the world? So, again, thanks for joining me on this journey and adventure. I'm glad you're here. I look forward to our next encounter, and good luck on your own journey.